Dune, Arrakis, desert planet. Now you're probably thinking, hey, why is James talking about a new movie? This is meant to be a DOS gaming channel, right? Well, I'm not. As you can probably see by the title, it says 1992 up there in brackets. And the reason for that is that I am talking about the game in the background. And that's Dune. Dune is a hybrid of adventure title with narrative and RTS. And you're probably thinking to yourself, well, we've had RTSs with story, you know, they mix. But again, this was in 1992. In 1992, the RTS as we know it didn't exist. That only came about with Dune 2, which is called Dune 2 because of this game. Even then, the RTSs shortly afterwards had no real story to them, it was just kill the other guy, you know? If you had no sound equipment, and you played the floppy version of Dune back in 92, you were probably thinking, yeah, it's alright. It's a decent little adventure title, it's a nice tie-in to the original book and to the David Lynch movie. There are nods there, and it's okay. But if you were in possession of an ad-lib gold card or an MT32 device, then Dune was outstanding. And the reason for that is because of the soundtrack. The soundtrack to Dune, I will harp on about it forever. I use it in the background of a lot of my videos. Stefan Peak made an absolute masterpiece, one of the greatest soundtracks ever. And it isn't a MIDI soundtrack, which is interesting, because most games at the time used MIDI notation, or PC speaker if they were behind the times, for their music. Remy Herbelo made the Herbelo ad-lib system, also known as Herad, which is similar to MIDI, but has advanced notation and can utilize the various bits and pieces that constitute the ad-lib gold and make it such a special card. Bits and pieces that weren't necessarily included by the ad-lib developers in their documentation, but were found out by the Cryo team as they designed this sound system entirely for this game. So what is Dune? Is it a straight copy of the book? Do you just run around doing all the things that Paul Atreides did? Yes and no, and that's what makes it significant. The plot of Dune the adventure game is not the same as the plot of Dune the book, or even Dune the movie. There are significant deviations on the part of Cryo, and that's very brave, because Frank Herbert's Dune is considered one of the greatest works of fiction ever. And one of the interesting things that Dune does right at the beginning is it gives you this big exposition-laden introduction to new players who may not have necessarily read the book or seen the movie, and it just guides them in gently and shows them the world and what's happening and who does what and who's the antagonist and who you are and why you're in Arrakis in the first place. So you don't necessarily have to have been a Dune fan to appreciate Dune the game. Alongside the music, one of the technical marvels of Dune is the fact that it's one of the first games to utilise the enhanced CD-ROM treatment. I spoke about how Dune was a passable adventure game if you didn't have, the music and you had the floppy version. The CD version upped the ante and went from having a beautiful soundtrack to also having fully voiced dialogue for every single character, which at the time was absolutely incredible. It was ported to various other systems as well. I believe there's an Amiga version and a Sega CD version, and both versions are quite good, even if they don't quite compare to the DOS version. One of the things that the VGA graphics standard really helped improve was how the game was depicted, how Arrakis was depicted, and how the people of Arrakis were depicted. And that can be really seen in the facial animations of the characters, and when they stare at you, you feel like they're actually looking at you. The other thing this highlights is the art style of the game, which is a significant departure from your sort of typical sort of Western fantasy style. Dune has a deeply colourful art style, almost alien in the way that they are expressing a distant future. I spoke briefly about the exposition at the start. That carries on into the adventure portion of the game, which runs alongside the RTS portion of the game. The characters are quite blatant about it. There's a famous line where it says, "I'm Jessica, your mother." Like you'd need to know. Oh yeah, I remember you, you're my mother. But what this does is allows the player to familiarise themselves with the world. And there's a book, an animated book at that, which helps you bone up on what it is you need to know about Arrakis and the surrounding conflict. As the adventure proceeds, you're tasked with going to various places. And in order to do this, you need what's called an ornithopter, which is like a cross between a plane and a helicopter, really. This allows for a fast travel element to the game, where you can hop from place to place so long as you've been there previously. But if you haven't been there previously, it usually only takes you, 30 seconds to a minute to get there. It's not too much of an imposition. In the CD-ROM version, there's full FMV video showing you this beautiful sloping desert that you're flying through, which changes depending upon the environment that you're in at the time, including a day-night cycle. This can lead for some beautiful vistas as you approach different buildings, and it really draws you into the world. So you're sent out to these beautiful sietches, and you have to beseech the Fremen to work for you. And you go around building a group of Arrakis natives to help you against the dreaded Harkonnens, who have also settled on Arrakis with the same goal. The thing is, it's not as clear-cut as simply hopping into a sietch and recruiting every Fremen you see. Eventually, you'll come across Fremen who simply don't want to work for you. There can be a variety of reasons for that, and it's up to you to figure out what's going on through the help of your companions. That's right, you can have up to 2 people travel with you at the same time, and they have varying insights on the world and give you contextual information about where you are and what you're doing so that you never feel entirely lost. Whether it's sorting out harvesting issues or prospecting issues or just Fremen who don't like each other. There's more to it than simply clicking on a man and saying, "Work for me!" Over time, the exposure to the spice melange changes Paul Atreides, who is the lead character. And this is represented in the game through the colour of your eyes and your growing powers of telepathy. You can contact Fremen from a distance, which means you don't have to travel from sietch to sietch. It just allows the later portion of the RTS game to swiftly proceed, without having to visit every single area. The adventure plot will introduce more and more game elements to integrate into the RTS side of things, with different rooms in the palace being unlocked, different locales being reached, whether it be smugglers or herbologists or different areas of the world that you previously had not seen. It's not simply a case of cut and paste sietches either. Some sietches differ significantly from others. You'll find out in due course. Eventually you'll run up against the Harkonnens for real, and that's when the combat element of Dune approaches. You train your Fremen as military units and send them out into real-time conflict, represented by 2 arms wrestling. In addition to this, there's the aforementioned herbologists who can plant bulbs and slowly transform the desert of Dune into a lush and beautiful environment. The biggest problem with Dune was that Dune 2 exists. It came out shortly after the first Dune, and it was a full RTS. And by full I mean it had features that the original Dune didn't. While there was no great narrative or adventure, the RTS element struck a chord with people. And when people talk about Dune, they usually mean the second game by Westwood. As a result of this, the original Dune is sort of seen as an afterthought, despite the fact that it integrated RTS elements before what was seen as the originator of what an RTS should be. For my money, Dune is the most evocative depiction of Arrakis ever. The combination of strange visuals and wonderful music that you're hearing in the background, courtesy of the Soundcard database, the link is in the description, meant that Arrakis came to life on your screen back in the 90s, and completely enveloped you. You lived and breathed the desert air as you quested about and guided your Fremen to victory. With Dune the movie coming out soon, I hope that we see some decent Dune games. For such an enormous sci-fi franchise, it's really been misused. But in the meantime, you can kick back and enjoy the wonders of Arrakis, courtesy of Cryo's wonderful game. And if you liked all that and you've not seen my channel before, look at this! It's a beautiful little sign that's been made for me. Feel free to subscribe and check me out on Facebook and Twitter. There's a lot more on the channel where that came from.